Hello guys, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to rank all 9 Rocky and Creed movies. It's been taking a little while to get this video out because I've been filming video after video after video and literally non-stop. And then I decided to take a break for 2 days. And then I'm, well, 1.5 really, because I'm filming this like right in the middle of the day. But I think that's fair enough. So, not much to say, but let's get started. Just coming in last place, obviously, is going to be Rocky 5. I mean, right from the beginning, I feel like everything's just out of place. Even the beat, like putting like a little title sequence in there didn't really make much sense at all. But okay, then he has nerve damage, which I thought was a good idea, but they didn't really play into that much in the movie except for like the first 20 minutes, which doesn't make much sense to me. And then you have a bunch of sequences with him just kind of avoiding his son and then just training this jerk, which we know he's a jerk. He ends up being a jerk in the end, and then he gets into a street fight with Rocky, which I like kind of like the fantasticalness of that, but and it just doesn't work. But I mean, I guess it's satisfying enough. I think the whole thing with the son I thought didn't work, where he was just avoiding him, and it just doesn't feel like Rocky back in, especially like when you see in Rocky 3 and 4, you see him like very tight with the son. And then you have the whole setup with him getting back down to street level, sort of with Paulie and the accountant. It didn't work. I don't know what else to say. I thought that was just a dumb setup for that. And then you have the Tommy Gunn character, which I mentioned he was a jerk, and it doesn't really even make sense how he decides to just go villain all of a sudden, where she was literally going up to fame, and then he left Rocky and then decided to fight him and in the streets, which I guess it works, but the fight itself is pretty cool, but the setup for it just doesn't work at all. Performances are even somewhat off here. But I think the real problem mainly is that they just didn't tie into the end of Rocky 4 to the end of this one. Am I the only one that just thinks it's weird that Rocky or Robert Balboa or son, whatever his name is like 3 years older out of nowhere? Did he like get in a time machine or something, or did Rocky get in a time machine? I've gotten past that. That's just a minor issue. But in the end, don't really care for this one. But it's still watchable. There are some good things here. I think kind of shifting back to the tone of the first two, I think works. I think getting Rocky back on street level is kind of an interesting dynamic compared to the glitz and gloss of the 80s Rocky movies. And I also do like some of the sequences at the gym where he has these visions of Mick, which those scenes are great. I love those scenes to death, but everything else, just no. But at the same time, it is a perfectly watched. Just as a point of reference, everything else from here and up, just fantastic, great. I love them. It's like 8 out of 10 and above. So at number 7, we got Rocky 2. I do enjoy this one. There are some great things here, like the training montage and the final fight I think really worked. Final fight's not exactly my favorite one, because I don't think it's perfect there. I think I definitely liked it a lot more on past watches. The first couple times I watched it, I really liked this one. And then it kind of fell back a bit in this watch. You got an amazing training montage and I think a really good final fight. But I think the problem here is the way they kind of have to get Rocky back in the ring and try to motivate him to fight again. It's a little odd. He decides to stop fighting and go to start doing commercials, and they just make Rocky look dumb and he can't read. And even though Rocky 3 like makes him much smarter here. I mean, he wasn't really presented as like the most intelligent guy out there in the first one, but they just make him look so dumb here, and then he's just trying to get all these jobs, and the first hour I think is a little tough to get through, and then I think once you get to the hospital sequence, I think things get a lot better, it starts to get a little bit more emotional between Rocky and Adrian, and then you have some of the scenes with Rocky at the church, and then you get to and then the last 40 minutes of this movie are great with the training montage and the final fight. I think really work. It's not the most satisfying victory because I don't think the setup was as good. When it's pretty much it took a while, and then all Rocky needed was to get Adrian's motivation. All she needed to say was
win.
And then Rocky's off to the battle. But still really enjoy this one. I think it has all the great things of the first one, the great training montages. I love some of the expanding of the characters, mainly where you see Rocky getting a little richer and having an actual house and start to have a family with Adrian as well as and then have a kid, they get married. I think all of that works very well, and there are a lot of great things here, but I just don't think the motivation for Rocky getting back in the ring just works as well as the first one. I don't even quite know exactly what it is, where he can't find a job, and Adrian goes to the hospital, so she tells him to win, and then he decides to finally get back in the ring. So it's just the pure motivation. That's kind of just what ruins this movie. But everything else, and the commercial thing, but everything else works. My number 7 is gonna be Creed 3. 7, 6, and 5 are all kind of tied, but I had to go with this one because it's the one I've seen the least. It's the one I think I'm going to need a little time to give with. But overall, I did really enjoy it. The villain, Damian Anderson, I think works very well in this franchise, who is obviously from Adonis' past. They were brothers at one point, and then they did something illegal. He went to prison for 18 years. Adonis ran and escaped, and then sort of went on with the rest of his life, kind of trying to get Damian away from it, and all of that. He kind of left him in the dust for all these years, and then Damian sort of went out, got out of prison, kind of seeking for revenge, I guess, and then they get in the ring, and yeah. I think that arc works very well. It's a new kind of villain we get in this franchise, and I quite like him. The performance from Jonathan Majors is fantastic. It just works perfectly in this role. He seems like a very imposing fighter, and poses a great threat, especially when you see him take out the champion, Felix, whatever his name is, and then you get to the final fight, and you get the little anime style thing. I'm not crazy about it, but I don't really hate it either. It's an interesting way to visualize everything. I did kind of feel the absence of Rocky there, but I wasn't saying, oh, where's Rocky the entire movie, but you'd still, I'm interested to see how they distance himself from the Rocky completely as they get into it, but a nice reference of Rocky would have been nice. And I think it kind of just moves away, I think, too far from the Rocky movie aesthetic. The color palette looks different. It just doesn't feel like a Rocky movie. Maybe that's because of the villain and everything they did with Nad. I don't quite know what it is exactly, but it doesn't quite feel like just your usual Rocky movie, which I think parts of it are okay because they're trying to move on with this Creed character, but parts of it aren't. But I think the real issue here, I feel right in the middle between the first fight and the training montage, which is 30 minutes, I want to say, or maybe even less. They feel like there's a bunch of stuff missing there. I feel specifically between Adonis and Damian, where how is he given the chance to easily just fight the champion, and then that I feel could have didn't make much sense. And then how is Damian just mad with Adonis without being up straight with him right at the beginning? Some things just don't quite make sense here, and I feel they definitely feel there was a good 20 minutes cut out of there. I thought that was odd, but really enjoyed this one. I like the character dynamics with Adonis. Now he's retired. He wants to train the champ, and then cuts into Damian. He kind of interferes with everything. I think all of that works out really well, and I think it has a very satisfying end with their sort of friendship kind of rebuilding again. But I did really enjoy this one, but it does have issues. Coming in number 6 is going to be Rocky 3. I quite enjoy this one. It's pretty rewatchable. I think Mr. T.S. Clubber Lang is a good character, because it feels like just Mr. T is a Rocky villain more so than a character. But that's still fun. I quite like the training on the beach in LA with Apollo Creed, and seeing their friendship build, I think, is really the high points of this movie. You see the 80s cheese kind of infesting itself into this movie, and I think it works for the most part. You got Hulk Hogan before he took over wrestling. I thought that was fun to see that. You also got sort of Rocky kind of moving into the glitz and gloss and the riches, and him become a rich man, and just seeing that, I think it's just a lot of fun to see. It's kind of refreshing coming off of Rocky 2, and I think all that really works. I think the fights are a bit of a drop off compared to the first two, but I think they work for the most part. And then I think you get to the training montage with Apollo Creed. I think that all works, where he wanted to get one last fight out with Clubber Lang, and then he loses pretty badly, and then that leads to him having to regain his confidence again. And I think the idea where he hasn't really fought a legit killer before, or an amazing fighter, except maybe Apollo, and then you see that here, and then he's afraid in the end, and then has to build up his confidence to get back in the ring. But once you get to that final fight, I feel it doesn't quite pay everything off well. First one, the sound effects, I feel are way too smashing. They don't even sound like punches. I know they're trying to show how hard the guy's punching, but Even in Rocky 4, it felt right. Here, it like, the sound effects feel like they just sound like smashes rather than punches. I don't know, I've always noticed that. It always bugged me. And then the where he's like, where Rocky's like, oh, let him punch me, and there before he gets there, and even Apollo's like, what? So I've never thought that was right. And the final fight is kind of just what kills this movie, because I think this movie has the dramatic moments pretty well. I think the death of Mick is pretty emotional for the most part, and I think it works. Some people say it doesn't. I've never quite understood that, but overall, I quite enjoy Rocky 3, though I don't think it's as good as some of the other ones. I do think it's a quite enjoyable Rocky movie. Coming in at number 5 is going to be Creed 2. I think this one is quite enjoyable. I've only seen it a few times. It's not the most rewatchable on the list, but I still think it really works. Seeing the Dragos again, I think is really good, where I think really what made me put this one ahead of Rocky 3 was what they did with the Dragos, where Ivan has to sort of learn the lesson where, like, his son is telling him that why should we trust these, or why do we care about these higher ups and what they think? They don't care about us. And then the way Ivan learns about that, because that's pretty much defined his life in his young adulthood, and then that led him up to when he had Victor, and that pretty much defined Victor's life. And I think him learning that, I think, is what really works about this movie in general. And then the Adonis stuff also works, where he gets engaged, has a kid, is figuring out what to do with that, and showing what him sort of get richer, showing what his personal life is like a little bit more than the first one, I guess. And I really liked all of that. The training montage in the desert is epic. I like what they did with Rocky. Him going back to his son in the end worked well. Him seeing Apollo at the cemetery really worked. And I quite like the ending here. And overall, I think everything here just works well. I quite enjoyed it all. The one issue, I wish the final fight had a little bit more stakes, where like it was implied that Adonis wants to kill this guy, and then I think that could have worked a bit better. But I liked the satisfaction of Ivan throwing the towel and realizing that he cares more about his son than a stupid trophy. And I think that's what works. And I think the way that kind of leads into Creed 3, where Victor's kind of living a sort of happier life in general than he was before, and I think that pays off well in general. So I quite enjoyed that. So yeah, Michael B. Jordan's great as always here. I like what they do with Rocky at the son. I think this one works fairly well for the most part. I just think it works. Simple as that. The only reason why it's not higher, it just doesn't wow me as much, and I don't have quite as much ties to this one as much as some of the other ones, and I don't think, but it doesn't like do anything wrong, so it's kind of right in the middle there. Number 4, gonna go with Rocky Balboa. Really enjoyed this one. I think I did this one a bit lower on my first ranking I did a while back, but to be honest, I really enjoy this one. I like the idea of him going back in memory lane and sort of revisiting all these things that were in the first Rocky. I think works. Seeing Little Marie, seeing Spider Rico, and going back to the neighborhood that he lived in the first one, I think works well. And then him getting a dog. I think there's just a bunch of sweet elements here that just work here. I think the whole thing with the son, I think, works, where he's sort of a bit more distant from his son than he was before, back in like Rocky 5. And then him sort of teaching his son a bunch of these lessons. And then you could see how like him and his son could have had like a great relationship, and then it got kind of messed up in the first one. And then he went to Vancouver, wherever his son was. And I think that all works in general. So I think the excuse to get Rocky back into the ring, I think, works to show that he's still relevant even when in his 50s, to show that he's still a good fighter and still a worthy fighter. I think that works. And him getting in the ring with Mason Dixon, though isn't overly realistic, and I don't think it makes much sense at all for like a 50-year-old to get into the ring. I think in the end it pays off well, and to show that Rocky is still basically a champion, or still like still a good contender, still worthy of being a great boxer. And seeing and then the whole thing with Mason Dixon, where he hasn't exactly been seen as the best fighter out there because he never fought like a worthy fighter, I think works. I love what they did with Paulie, where he has all this sort of regret because he treated Adrian badly and him retiring officially. I think all of that works. Seeing Rocky interact with Lil Marie after all these years, I think really works well. And not seeking for like a love interest, but just for like a friend. I think in the end, I think a lot of that works. So some of the ideas, some of them going back to memory lane, it does feel like that's kind of the point of this movie, but I'm fine with that. It was really like the first Legacy sequel before that became a big thing, and I think it works in the end. 16 years later, got a new Rocky movie, and I think it's really good. Even though I don't think it's that realistic to see Rocky get back into the ring, but I don't care, it works. Number 3, you got Rocky 4. I think this movie's awesome. You have all of the 80s, glitz, the gloss, the cheese, the Cold War implemented here, steroids, Ivan Drago.
I must break you.
That's all awesome. I don't like the robot though. I hate that. I fully admit it. And then overall, the final fight is just probably the best one in the franchise, where it's not even really about the character elements. It's just about revenge and superhero versus supervillain, and the speech at the end. All of that just works well. It's so fun. Love the training montage where he runs to the mountain. It's supposed to take place in Russia, but I know it's like filmed somewhere like Jackson Hole or something. So I just loved all of that. It's all awesome here. The death of Apollo, I think, works for the most part. I mean, it does kind of literally montage through everything here. I never saw the director's cut, which I do have to bring that up, and I heard that one's the better version, or at least the less cheesy version, but based on how much I love this one, I don't know if I'll like that one more. Maybe I will. I'll watch it someday, but not at the moment. I'm a little busy right now, so don't have time. And overall, I think just what works about this movie is just all the 80s cheese. It's so much fun. The soundtrack is great. Sung a bunch of Survivor songs, mainly Burning Heart is probably my favorite one there. You've I have the Tiger play at the beginning, obviously. And yeah, I just loved everything they did here. And I think the death of Apollo, where he's like, wants to die a fighter, doesn't want to pass away like a normal person. So that's all a lot of fun. Ivan Drago's an awesome villain presented here. It's just this huge Russian guy who's pretty much a David and Goliath situation. So, and it literally is. And I think that in the end, it really is what works here. One problem, I don't like the robot. It montages through maybe a little bit too much. And I think there's some sequences where I heard there's this scene in the director's cut about the boxing committee, which I've seen the clip. They should have kept that in. But all the cheesy stuff I think works. And I think this movie just works in general. I love it. Coming number 2 is going to be Creed, where I wasn't sure where to put this one. Between this and Rocky 4, they were kind of close. But I put this one ahead because I love what they did with the character of Adonis Creed, where he wants to know if he wasn't a mistake or anything like that, because he was the son born late, wasn't really accepted by the other siblings in the house that you saw in the first 2 Rockies in Apollo's house. And you also have the whole thing where he wants to prove himself worthy of the name Creed as he gets in the ring with Ricky Conlon. I think that all of that works well. Him getting trained by Rocky. Rocky, I think, got nominated for an Oscar, but maybe should have won. Not Rocky, Sylvester Stallone. I think this is probably his best performance as Rocky. You see him get cancer, and you see him sort of want to just die at that point because all of his people did. Mick, Adrian, his sons his sons left him. His Apollo died a while ago. He doesn't really have anyone in his life anymore. And then you see Adonis come in, and he's what convinces him to get the treatment he needs. And I think that all of that is just really compelling. Seeing Adonis kind of go from, I don't want to say rags to riches, because it really isn't that. I mean, it wasn't. But, like, it sort of is, I guess. And then you see him get into Rocky's life. Rocky trains him. The training montage, I don't think is really anything special here. Except the bit where he's running with the scooter, bike, whatever you want to call it. That's a lot of fun here. And I think this movie's great. I think it goes back to sort of the roots of the franchise.
Grab one of these birds.
Are you serious?
I am serious.
It's a bit more of a drama and then an action movie, I guess. But everything's just great here. I just love where they took this movie in general. You see him getting with Bianca, or what's her name? Tessa Thompson. I think that works here. The final fight, I think, is one of the best in the franchise. This one or Creed 3 probably is the most realistic fights, where they don't have like the extremely over-the-top special effects like the 80s ones did. And unlike Rocky 2, he's not just getting punched in the face. There's actual ducking and blocking and stuff. So you see all of that. I think that all really works here. The final fight's great. I think this movie's great. And nothing really holds this one back. I just like the first one more. Easily coming in at number 1. I don't know about easily, but this one comes in number 1. It's going to be the original Rocky. What works so well about this movie is really the underdog story. I love what they did here, where he is just this guy just living he seems like a nice guy, but really people know him, and he's kind of shady with his job, and he's a leg breaker and for a loan shark. And I think, as Mick literally says, he literally had the potential to become a great boxer, and then instead he picked that career. And I think a lot of the lessons you can learn in this movie, like living up to your potential, or at least going for it, I think that's all really compelling. And I think that's why we all sort of relate to this character, because this movie kind of gives you the motivation to sort of go for it. Go for all your passions, even if it doesn't work, you still gave it your all and trying. And I think that all of those lessons are really why this movie works in the end. And I think there are just some amazing moments, in particular the part where he runs up the steps, obviously. But I think another moment, I don't know if it's talked about as much, in the final fight where you see Apollo sort of toying with him, and then you see Rocky land like a hard punch on him, and then it kind of just flips the switch a little bit. You see Apollo start talking him smack to him, but it's mainly just out of respect. And I like how Apollo's never presented a villain, because he's the one that gave Rocky the title shots. And then Rocky, at first he'd said no because he was scared, but then the guy convinced him enough to say yes. And then, I mean, it's hard to remember if you really go back and watch this movie. You see Mick doesn't like Rocky at the beginning because he has all the potential, but he doesn't go for it. And I think that's what works in general. And then you see him in the sequels, and he's practically like a surrogate father to Rocky in many ways when you get to Rocky 2 and Rocky 3. And then the final fight, I think, is probably the best of the franchise. The training montage, probably second or third best of the franchise, where you see him just punching the meat, running up the steps, running faster and faster. There's the bit looking against the train, and doing these one-arm push-ups where he switches. This movie's just a classic. I absolutely love it. I could go on and tell you why this movie's so good, but I don't need to. It's pretty obvious why. And I think this one easily is the best motivation, just to prove himself that he has what it takes to get into the ring and fight the champ, even if he doesn't come out on top, which, if you're remembering this movie, he didn't. He didn't exactly lose, but I think another thing that also works is that in the end, when they're announcing the winner, he doesn't care. He's just looking for Adrian. And then, I could go on and on why this movie's so good, but I don't need to. This movie comes in at number 1. Absolutely love it. And thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below, and see you guys next time. Adios.